Kia ora koutou. Today we are looking at income elasticity of demand. So remember, elasticity is how responsive someone is to a change in a factor. So in this case, it's how responsive a consumer is to the change of an income. So how responsive the quantity demanded is to a change in income. So essentially we're trying to determine the type of a good. So the calculations are similar to the price elasticity of demand. So the only difference is essentially we are looking at income, and remember Y in economics stands for income. So the percentage change formula at the top, elasticity of income, is the percentage change in the quantity demanded over the percentage change in income. And down the bottom we have the midpoint formula, which has changed a wee bit, but this one's easier. So the change in the quantity divided by the old quantity plus the new quantity times the old income plus the new income divided by the change in income. So these are two methods of calculation. So depending on what the coefficient is, we'll be able to figure out the type of good. So if the coefficient is less than 1, it's negative. This means they are inferior goods. If it's between 0 and 1, then it is a necessity. Now remember, necessity has an inelastic demand, so therefore that makes sense for the coefficient to be between 0 and 1. They're not very responsive. And then the last one, if it's a positive coefficient, then the good will be a luxury. So for inferior goods, they will have a negative income elasticity coefficient because, of course, when income goes up, our demand for inferior goods goes down because we can afford more luxury type goods. Okay, so we will switch our consumption from inferior goods to more luxury goods when our income goes up. So it's always the opposite effect. So income goes up, the demand for inferior goods goes down. So it has a negative elasticity coefficient. So here's an example. Mints had a 2% decrease in sales when national income rose by 5%. Calculate the income elasticity of demand. So of course we're going to use the percentage change formula. So the percentage change in the quantity over the percentage change in income. So on the top we have the percentage change in the quantity. Well, it decreased by 2, so that's why it's a negative 2, divided by our percentage change in income, which is 5. So negative 2 divided by 5 is negative 0.4. Because it's a negative, then it must be an inferior good. Okay, so notice it's very important that we take into account negatives. Necessities have, as I've already kind of talked about, an income elasticity between 0 and 1 because they have an inelastic response. So because necessities are obviously a requirement by consumers, when there's a change in their income, they will not change the demand for these goods by a lot. Okay, they are not very responsive to price changes for these goods. So therefore, obviously, we have an inelastic response. So for example, assume national income increases from 50,000 to 55,000 and the sales on bread increase from 9,000 to 9,500. Calculate the income elasticity using the midpoint method. So here is our midpoint method. We're going to substitute in the values. So the change in the quantity, well, the bread went up from 9,000 to 9,500, so a change in our quantity is 500 on top, and it's positive because it's increased, divided by our original sales of 9,000 to our new sales of 9,500 times our original income, which was 50,000, plus the new income, which is 55,000, divided by the change in the income. It's increased by 5,000, so it's a positive. Put this on your calculator and you should get 0.57, rounding obviously to 2 decimal places. So therefore, bread would be considered a necessity because our coefficient is between 0 and 1. And of course that makes sense because bread is kind of seen as a staple food that most people would consume. Luxuries have a elasticity of coefficient greater than 1 because luxuries are obviously the opposite to a necessity. They are something that we consume when we have a lot of extra disposable income. So they have an elastic response. It's also because the luxuries usually take up a large proportion or percentage of our income. So when our income changes, we will be quite responsive to price changes in luxuries. So here's an example. National incomes decreased from 60,000 to 55,000 and sales on new TVs decreased from 8,000 to 6,000 to calculate the income elasticity using the midpoint method. So here's a midpoint method. Now this time the change in our quantity, well, it went from 8,000 to 6,000, so it's negative 2,000 on the top, divided by our original sales of 8,000 plus our new sales of 6,000 times our original income of 60,000 plus a new income of 55,000, and of course that's decreased, so minus 5,000. There's been a decrease of 5,000. Put this in our calculator and it should equal to 3.29. So I'm just rounding it to 2 decimal places. Of course this is greater than 1, so new TVs must be considered a luxury good. Okay. What is important, obviously this makes sense because two negatives, this would be a negative answer and this side would be a negative answer, two negatives times together make a positive answer. Okay, so there are our income elasticities. So hopefully this helps you and makes sense, and I will see you later.